I joined Facebook 1 year ago last week, March 17th. I know this, I know the date of that anniversary, not because I wrote it down, but because Mark Zuckerberg was kind enough to send me a notice over Facebook. I joined, of course, in order to, well, maybe not of course, but I joined in order to keep up with you, to stay connected to church members during the pandemic. I had put Facebook off forever, but COVID prompted me. And to be honest, Facebook, especially in its capacity to keep us connected as a church, well, it's been a delight to me and a surprise also. But Facebook also put me under the great middle-aged Facebook temptation. What's up with my friends from high school? I had a basketball teammate in high school named Jason. Jason saw the world differently. He stared out the school bus window one time on a road trip at Lake Superior for 2 hours on our way to a game up in Grand Marais. After 2 hours of looking out at the lake, he turned to me and he said, "I saw huge fish leaping out of the water one after another, and they were looking right back at me." Then he turned back to the window. "What are the fish saying to you, Jason?" I wish I'd asked him that, but I didn't. Facebook did give me a second chance, though, a second chance to reach out, or at least to find out what Jason is up to these days. What's he doing? He's doing his laundry. I saw the post. That's an old Carrie Brownstein joke, actually. The truth is, he's preaching. He's preaching alarming sermons, or I should say narrow, focused sermons, almost exclusively concerned with the question of your eternal salvation, my eternal salvation. He's preoccupied with the subject. I'm sure he'd find much to argue with if he did the equivalent and started listening to the sermons that I preach and I write and that others preach and write here at St. Paul's. Actually, one of the sermons I heard him preach made me worry that he might be listening in. Here's what he said. "Some churches never preach salvation. They ignore the entire point of Christianity." I saw that on YouTube and I thought to myself, oh no, somebody's tuning in. I don't know, of course, if he was talking about St. Paul's, but of course I got defensive, right? Well, some churches never preach turn the other cheek, love your enemies, renounce your wealth, help the poor, cure the ill for free. Some churches act as if Jesus dropped out of the sky as a fully grown man and died on the cross that same afternoon. If the values he embodied weren't essential, if the lessons that he taught were not essential, why did God give him more than 3 decades and 4 gospels to get his point across? I'm wrong, you're wrong. What if there are 2 kinds of Christians and we're both wrong? Jesus didn't make a distinction between what he taught and how he died. Neither did the government that killed him. Neither should we. Jesus didn't make a distinction between how he died and what his death accomplished. Neither does the New Testament. Neither should we. It's not a choice between preaching salvation and preaching social justice. The two are tied together in the body of Jesus Christ. Of course, we're going to have our own opinions and our own response to the impact that Jesus has in our lives. All of us will. When we describe this impact, right, when we try to account for it, when we try to proclaim it or advocate for it, our very human hopes and thoughts and experiences, very human hopes and thoughts and experiences, our convictions, our uncertainties, all of these are going to be felt very strongly, right? It's important. And they should be felt strongly. Left-leaning preachers tend to focus on what Jesus taught. Christians who are afraid of hell, obviously, tend to focus on how Jesus saved them and how he can save you. Either way, though, our opinions, our angle, our perspective isn't really that important. Comparable, Karl Barth says, with the foam of a waterfall plunging from the highest mountaintops. The real thing isn't the foam. That's not the point. The real thing is the mountaintop and the water and the way they come together to make a mighty waterfall. The real thing is the love of Jesus Christ, not our opinions about it. At best, our opinions are foam to his waterfall, to God's waterfall. Not God in the abstract as some distant power looming over us, but God in our lives, God in Jesus Christ, who comes to us to shape us and to embrace us. Jesus Christ, the one whose love made us. Of course, we resist that kind of diminishment, right? Nobody wants to be the foam. You want to be the waterfall. We want to be the royalty of our own lives, kings and queens of existence, even if our realm is limited to the living room and our own appetites. We haven't sung out a song of gratitude for the gift of existence every time we exhale, right? We don't do that. Instead, we think about what we're in control of. We rebel against the notion that our very existence is a gift. We rebel against it. We push against it. We ignore that claim. Adam fell into this sin. He didn't want to be dependent on God. Israel did it again and again. We do it. And part of the reason we do it is because the world lives and thinks and speaks and earns and pays and seeks and finds on the downward way of such sinfulness. And the world does it because we do it. We're the world. But still, we're caught up in a system that rewards that kind of thinking. If this were not the case, the bulk of your tax dollars wouldn't go to buy weaponry, right? Who wants to say that? Who wants to hear it on a Sunday morning? It's dangerous to start thinking this way. We're rewarded for denying our dependence on God, in as much as cannibalizing ourselves is rewarding. It's not just that we don't deserve grace. It is that God knows this and gives it to us anyhow. That's another point that Bart makes. And we don't recognize it. We kind of get it, but we pretend it's background noise or not there at all. It isn't just that we don't deserve grace, it's that God knows we don't deserve grace and gives it to us anyhow. And then adding insult to injury, we refuse it, right? We don't recognize it. This love that I can't escape, this love that threatens to shatter my preferred way of thinking, love that I need so badly, love that threatens to set me free from the brainwashing I've been subjected to from the very first time I turned on the TV as a 4-year-old child. Love that threatens to turn everything upside down, brainwashed, brain dead. I don't want the freedom grace brings. I want limitless bondage instead. Trapped inside of our own desires and ideas and appetites, we turn our backs on God and we are rewarded for it. It doesn't matter. It does not matter. Jesus Christ comes to us anyhow. The love of God saves us anyhow. So really, if I am honest, Jason is right. I ought to preach salvation more frequently. Because the truth of the universe is that in Jesus Christ, we are forgiven, accepted, beloved, embraced, brought home, made whole, healed. That's the truth of the universe. Which is not to say that this is some kind of sentimental exercise by a kindly, doddering God. Forgiveness is not a pat on the back. Forgiveness is not indulgent. God doesn't overlook the brutal impact of human sinfulness. Forgiveness that minimizes transgression is avoidance. It's not forgiveness. Correction that won't name the error it is trying to speak to is incompetence. It's not correction. Grace that ignores sin is dishonesty. It's not grace. Of course, the grace, right? It does come to us gently. Jesus Christ comes to us as gently as Christmas Eve. God's grace shows us that existence without love is a lie. A life or a nation or a relationship that rests on power or manipulation or coercion is an error and a lie. So we don't need to fear anything, right? That's what grace tells us. We don't need to take anxiously anything. We don't need to anxiously wring pleasure out of self-sufficiency, which is how we spend much of our time. We don't need to do that because we no longer understand ourselves as in charge or alone or in charge of even our own lives. We don't need to try to find satisfaction in the anxiety of self-direction or autonomy. We belong to God. And all of this is positive, the gentle way that grace brings love into our lives. It's all positive. But before it's positive, it's Lent right now. Remember that. We are on our way to the cross. And before it is positive, grace comes to us as judgment, handing out convictions left and right. God wouldn't cook up something as fearsome as the cross if the situation were not so dire. God isn't into melodrama or overkill. It's a serious problem. We are a serious problem. God wants desperately to bring us back into her fold. But God doesn't want to embrace your sinful self. God does not want to embrace or excuse your sinful self. She wants to destroy it. She hates it. She didn't create it. Sin is nothing but negation. It is the antithesis of being. Nothing but denial, the power of non-being, which means that our sin prevents us from being who we were created to be. It stops us from being the children of God, even as it sometimes makes us very, very sophisticated adults. God doesn't want to embrace your sin. He wants to embrace you. He does not want to embrace your sinful self. He wants to kill it, even if he has to die doing it. And he died doing it. He died doing it. This is the truth that precedes and subverts any response but awe. He died killing our sinfulness. This is the truth that precedes and subverts religion. And this means that none of us need to sacrifice ourselves or anyone else in service to a false religion. The sin that is in you, that has wormed its way in so deeply it feels as if it must be an essential part of you, even though it is not, that sin was destroyed. Christ shattered the head of your brain-dead sinning self. That's where the power of this morning's psalm comes in, this martial imagery. He shattered the head of your brain-dead sinning self. Your inhumanity is dead. It died on the cross. Your human self, the self that God created, the person that you were made to be, doesn't have to be crucified. That's what that means. Your sinning self already died. You don't have to suffer. No one needs to be sacrificed. God's burning love, God's wrath, that's how Barth describes wrath, as burning love. It fell on Jesus instead. And we can get all caught up in that. What does that mean? Is it some sort of divine child abuse? No, because we are Trinitarians. And what we believe then when we say God's wrath fell on Jesus instead of us is really God took it upon himself. The judgment we deserve, God directed back at himself. He died for us. For us. For the whole and the sum of our identities. For you. For your essential true self. And this means that anyone, any news account you read, any feeling in your own heart, any relative or friend that you listen to, who implies or accepts, given the news this week, that in order to save masculinity, some women must suffer, they are worshiping a lie. And this means that anyone who implies or accepts that in order to preserve whiteness, some Asians must die, they are worshiping a lie. And it means that anyone who believes that in order to save our right to bear arms, some people are going to get shot. What can you do about it? That's just the way it goes. It means that person is practicing a false and demonic religion. We don't need to preserve a thing. We don't have to save anything. We've already been saved into freedom, into the truth of who we really are, into God's peaceful kingdom. Jesus died in order to put your sinning self to death. He took it with him. The fire of God's love burned down all of your transgressions and errors and follies and faults and lies and crimes and complicity with systemic injustice. Just as Karl Barth says, a whole burnt offering is consumed on the altar with the flesh and skin and bones and hoof and horns, rising up as a fire to heaven and disappearing. What a nasty, brutal image. And what truth is in it? The truth of the cross. This is how God has dealt with every sinful self. With my sinful self. And with your sinful self. Your sinning self has no future. No hold over you or anyone else. Your sinning self is the king Christ came to shatter. It's the criminal Christ came to judge. Your sinful self is the enemy Jesus Christ routs so utterly that he folds it into a footstool and puts his sandals up on it while relaxing on a Sunday afternoon. Your sinning self is dead. It's stumbling toward an open grave. Don't go with it. Amen.